Good afternoon and welcome to another study of the book of Genesis. I truly miss being in person with all you folks in the auditorium, and we all long for the day that we can return. I certainly miss the comments by people in the class, and I really hope that the study that we're doing online streaming will be of a benefit to you. It's a little bit more difficult to do just lecturing as opposed to hearing what you as the class have to say from time to time. I do miss that aspect of it, but I also want you to know that we'll continue doing this study as long as we hope that there is a blessing to be found for the people that are watching live. Last week we finished up almost in the book of Genesis chapter 26. We have just a very few verses that we want to cover, but let's, as we a lot of times do, let's go ahead and kind of recap and do a little catching up. Let's catch ourselves up to what's going on thus far. We know at this point that Esau and Jacob are born. We know that Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for some pottage. Then in chapter 26, we know that Isaac, because of the famine, moves to seek food for his family and for the people that are with him. We know that when he comes into the city that he lies about Rebekah being his sister, and he does this to Abimelech, who's the king. Abimelech was not happy and basically said, "Why would you do this to me? Why would you take the chance of causing a cursing on my entire nation by your fear and lying to me about who really is your wife?" We know that Isaac has prospered, and he prospers well. And because of that, we feel like probably according to the way the Bible reads, is Abimelech's men are beginning to get jealous. They're tired of seeing someone that would be basically a stranger in their community do so well. So what they do is they start giving the problems for Isaac in that they fill up all the wells so that he has to move from spot to spot because there's no water to take care of his herds. If we talk about the progression of events that have taken place, we've got wells that were dug. There were actually 2 wells that were dug, and they had to move on to the 3rd because the Philistines claimed them. They always moved to avoid conflict, which I think shows us a little bit about the positive part of Jacob's character in that he is not seeking his own wisdom. He's seeking what God would have him to do in these events. God appears to comfort Isaac. Abimelech comes and visits him unexpectedly, and there's a treaty made between these 2 men. It seems at this point that now Abimelech had a fear of Isaac and his power because of the power of Isaac's God. And so he comes to the table and basically asks for a treaty between those 2 men. The servants dug and found a well that produced water abundantly, and the name of that well was called Shiloh. Let's read verses 34 and 35 of chapter 26, and that will finish up this chapter. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. It's a little unusual, really, that these 2 verses weren't placed at the end of chapter 25. It would appear chronologically that it would make more sense for them to be there. One thing for sure, it's certain that Isaac and Rebekah hated the idea of their son marrying the daughter of pagans there in Canaanite. We see polygamy that was started by their grandfather, Abraham. It's still alive and active, and we see the negative results of what happened. The Hittites, of course, were a polytheistic, idolatrous people, and it would hurt parents of a child when someone married someone that would be like that, marry someone that would be idolatrous. As we conclude this chapter, I want you to notice something, that everything that's said about Isaac is now complete. Far more is revealed about his father Abraham and his son Jacob than what was stated about Isaac. And Isaac, of course, was the promised son. but we see that most of the Bible from here on out regarding these three men are going to dwell mainly with the son Jacob. So let's move on into chapter 27 of Genesis. The beginning with this chapter and really throughout Genesis is where we're going to see the life, the prosperity, and the many activities of Jacob, and that will be the theme really throughout the rest of this book. So with that in mind, let's read Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 through 4. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, now I am old. I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field, and take me some venison, and make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. It is thought now that Isaac is probably around 117 years old, and that Jacob would be about 57 years old. We know now that because of his advanced age, that it appears that he's blind or going blind. I want you to note the way that he addressed Esau. He addressed him again as my son, which denotes continued favoritism on his part over his younger son, Jacob. We have no clue when we will die any more than Jacob did. Sometimes age has a way of changing the way we do things, and pain pops up in places we didn't even know we had. But in this case, Isaac seemed to think his time was near. Actually, he lived another 40 years after he made this comment that he was getting old. In verses 3 and 4, we see something that should really, really catch our attention. And here's what it is. It's obvious that Isaac is still going to try and attempt to bless Esau with his birthright, even though it was sold to his brother. He states in verse 4 that my soul may bless thee before I die. Let's keep one thing vividly in mind as we move forward. The birthright at this point does not belong to Esau, because that birthright was sold to Jacob by Esau a couple of chapters back. Now let's make sure we have a clear understanding of what we're having going on here. Esau knew how to get his father's attention by the way that he hunted and by the way he cooked. It's clear that he was pleased with Esau's kill from time to time and the way he prepared it. And obviously he had done this for his father many times before, because he says, prepare, go get meat such as I love. We have to assume that Esau is playing a big part in this scheme, just like his father did. The question is, what is really at stake with this blessing that we're talking about? Why is it so vital, and why is it so important for Isaac at this point to make sure that he gives it to Esau thinking he's going to die? Well, first of all, the blessing, birthright, those words can be used because they're the same, one or the other. It meant that they had headship over Isaac's household when he passed. From a physical standpoint, monetary standpoint, the right of a double portion of the father's wealth was given to the person with the birthright. And bear in mind, the person with the birthright normally would have been the eldest son. And of course, we know that Esau was born first. Remember, Jacob was the heel catcher. He caught his heel as he was leaving the womb. We know that Esau was the oldest. Also, the right of the priesthood on behalf of the chosen people was handed down to this particular person that would be blessed with the blessing given by Isaac. Let's read just verse 5. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison and to bring it. Well, just like Sarah had done years before, back in chapter 18, verse 10, Sarah had eavesdropped. We see here now that Rebekah was eavesdropping And the conversation that she heard was very vital to what was be happening in the very near future regarding Jacob and Esau and Isaac and Rebekah. Verses 6 and 7. Now that she has heard what has been said between these two men, Isaac and Esau, here's what she does in verses 6 and 7. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speaking to Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison, and make me savory meat, that I may eat, and may bless thee before the Lord, before my death. As we say today, the plot now thickens. In Rebekah's words, here's what she's saying. We need to get busy. We need to get really busy, and I'll tell you why. Jacob, because your oldest brother Esau is getting ready to get this birthright from his father. You need to be aware that there's action that we need to do to make sure that this doesn't take place. We need to do something very quick to prevent this from happening. That's exactly what she's telling Jacob, because there is a concern that Isaac, who has the right to hand down this birthright, is going to give it to the son that really does not deserve it. Let's note her statement also that Jacob was her son, just like Isaac had mentioned that Esau was his son. And again, that sounds familiar because what we see once again is parental preferential treatment, one child over the other. Verses 8 through 10. This is now Rebekah speaking to Jacob. Verses 8 through 10. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock, and fetch from thence 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, just like he loves. And thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death. We need to remember that when Rebekah was pregnant, as you recall, the angel of the Lord appeared to her, and what did he tell her? He said, you're having twins, and he said the older would be serving the younger. So why would she see the need to intervene? Again, it's a question of faith. Her faith should have allowed God to take things on his own terms, but her impatience, just like that of Sarah, caused her to act. She decided to use a method that would, in many people's eyes, would be considered unethical to achieve her purpose. Since Jacob was not a hunter, they would improvise and they'd use a goat. And they would use deceptive means to fool Isaac. I've never tasted goat. I've tasted venison before. I understand that they taste nothing alike. So this again shows the skills of Rebekah to change that taste. And we also have to understand that at the age that Isaac was, his ability to taste food probably had been diminished quite a bit. If he was going blind, maybe some of his other senses may have changed as well. Verses 11 and 12. And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, I am a smooth man. My father peradventure will feel me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver, and I shall bring a curse upon me, and not a blessing. So here's the reaction of Jacob. He says, okay, I'll go out and I'll get this meat for you. I'll bring you back the goat meat, and you can fix it to make it taste like venison, but we're still a long ways from being able to take care of this plan of ours. What if I get caught? What will become of the blessing then? We see that there's a lot of deception going on during this planning stage. First of all, remember what she told her son. She said, obey my voice of what I command you. That's in verse 8. So Jacob is going to do what she's asking him to do. First of all, as she said, go kill a goat, and she's going to cook it like it so it would taste like venison. Another thing that you're going to see, we're going to read about in a few verses, is because he had smooth skin and his brother had hairy skin, they had to do something to fool this gentleman named Isaac, who was going blind, to make sure that the plan would come through successful for them. So what they did is they went and they got skins of the kids of the goats. They're actually called camel goats. Oriental camel goats' wool is black, it's silky, and has a fine texture, much like the hair of humans. And there are many today that are still using this as a replacement for human hair. So, you think about the plan as it's coming to fruition. Right now we've got taste and we've got feel that will be taken care of. But the third thing that we had to be concerned about is, I'm sure that the odor of Esau was very distinct. And that's a nice and kind way of saying that he probably had an odor that wasn't really pleasant. He went out in the field on a regular basis to hunt. They didn't have the ability as we do to clean clothes as we do. So we have to assume that there was a totally different odor between Jacob and his brother Esau. So that was also a concern of Jacob. Okay, we're going to have the food that's going to be used to trick him. We're going to have camel goat hair to fool my father, who's almost blind. But also now we're also going to be wearing Esau's clothing. Let's read verse 13. And his mother said unto him, Upon me be thy curse, my son, only obey my voice and go fetch me them. So in verse 12, we see the concern that Jacob had. It doesn't seem that he was that concerned about deceiving his father. His concern was getting caught. His concern was that he would be considered a deceiver and that he would lose the chance of receiving this blessing. And so his mother says, you don't worry about it. I'll accept the responsibility. Upon me be the curse. And she was cursed. After the act that took place, Jacob left, if you remember, because he had a fear of the retaliation from his brother Esau. He left for the fear of his life. Rebekah actually had him to leave. There was no intention on him going, looking for a wife to be gone as long as he was gone. There's no doubt in my mind, and those of the readers would think that Rebekah thought that she would see her son again. But to know that she would never, according to the records that we have, she would never see her son again, that she deeply loved, that would be possibly the curse that she's accepted to take the responsibility for. Verses 14 through 17. And he went, and he fetched and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory meat such as his father loved. And Rebekah took goodly raiment of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. And she gave him the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. You know, the plan now is coming into the action stage. They've done the planning. Now it's time to act on these plans. Skins of the kids of the goats, again, we made that easy to understand. These animals, the hair felt like human hair. She was instructed to him to make sure he had it on his hands and on the back of his neck. Obviously, because when he was close to his father, traditionally there would have been a kiss that would have been placed on the son. The father would have probably grabbed the back of the neck. So that was used for deception. What's really interesting, though, is when it says that he would use goodly garments of Esau. I find this to be really interesting. I've never studied this before. Chances are these were most likely special garments that were associated with priestly function of the head of the house. We can conclude then that Esau wore these garments to hunt in, since the deception was that of smell, and these garments would have had that smell. What disrespect it would have been for him to have worn these sacred garments in such a fashion. And it further, I think, indicates the character of the man named Esau. Verses 18 and 19. Chapter 27, 18 and 19. And he came unto his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. Who art thou, my son? And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me. Now remember, the reason that Jacob knew to say that, I've done as according as you've asked me to do, is because his mother had overheard the conversation. Isaac had told Esau to go in the field and bring him some venison back. And the mother heard that and, of course, conveyed that to Jacob. So this is a well thought out, deceptive plan. We need to ask ourselves at this point, however, this. How in the world could this family have gotten so unbalanced? The very thought of a son being this deceptive is something for almost like a Hollywood movie script. You're going to see lie after lie after lie and deception after deception after deception over the next few verses. Now, what would be the feelings that Jacob would have at this point? Let's put our feet in his shoes. He's walked in. He's into the tent with his father. It's just he and his father. His father's sitting there. He's an older man now. I would think there would have to be some compassion that he would have for him. He's blind. He can't see. And in verse 18, he says, and he came unto his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. Who art thou, my son? He couldn't even visualize that it was the son that he loved, Esau, that truly who he was Jacob. So what would be the feelings Jacob would have right now? Well, first of all, I would think fear. He already talked about the concern about losing his birthright, so there would be that fear. The fear of retaliation, maybe from his father if he got caught, certainly from Esau. How about anticipation? Just wondering, is this plot going to work? And if it does work, what's going to happen? And if you combine all that together, I think just generally the word concern has to come into play. He had to have been concerned about what he was doing. The question is, do you think there was a sense of guilt at all on his part? Here's the thing. Let's call a spade a spade. He was outright lying. That's what he was doing. He said, I am your firstborn. He said, I am Esau, thy firstborn. He said he was bringing venison as had been requested to him. So the deception plan is moving along. Let's read just verse 20. And Isaac said unto his son, How is it that thou hast found it so quickly, my son? And he said, Because the Lord thy God brought it to me. There's a couple of things that are really interesting here. First of all, probably if you can categorize a white lie and a bad lie, a really bad lie, they're all lies, and I understand that. We as mature Christians know that it's a sin to lie. But the worst lie of all, if you categorize, had to be this one. When the question was asked, how did you find it so quickly? And his terrible response from Jacob was, Jehovah thy God gave me good speed. Do you find it interesting that Jacob, who is being identified in this case as Esau, made the comment, your God? That tells us a little bit more about Esau's conviction, his lack of belief and obedience to the God that his father Isaac worshiped, because he said, your God, not my God and not our God. So at this point, the terrible response that he gave was just simply another lie. That God had given him good speed to find this venison quickly because I wanted to get back to you, my father, and bring it back to you as quickly as I possibly could. Verses 21 through 23. And Isaac said unto Jacob, Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy as his brother's Esau's hands, so he blessed him. We see some uncertainty now on the part of Isaac, don't we? He said, everything adds up, but you just don't sound anything like my son. You sound like Jacob. You know, for some reason, that deception moved along, however, because it was so well planned. I can only imagine how nervous Jacob must have been now at this point when he approached Isaac for him to feel of him. But the goat skins worked. He placed his hand strategically where all of the camel goat hair had been placed. He didn't put it anywhere where it would have felt his smooth skin. The skins worked so that even though he sounded like Jacob, the deception works. We have some nonverbal lies as well. He wore Esau's clothes. He wore the goat hair. Sometimes you don't have to speak a word to lie, do you? And then we read in verse 23, so he blessed him. We are out of time. I want to thank you again for listening this afternoon. We'll pick up next week with the rest of this chapter and move on into the next chapter of the book of Genesis. My wish for you is that you stay safe. We certainly miss seeing everyone at East Main. The decisions that we're making are tough right now. We thank you very much for your continued prayer on our behalf as we as elders try to do our very best to make the right decisions for all those members of East Main Church of Christ. God bless you and have a good rest of the day.